The day I found my husband packing his suitcase while I was getting chemo was the day I learned that love isn't always stronger than fear. But you won't believe what I did about it. My name is Clara, and 6 months ago, if you told me I'd be sitting here today, radiant and confident, gracing the cover of a national magazine while my ex-husband watches from the sidelines, I would have laughed until I cried. Actually, I was doing plenty of crying back then, just not from laughter. Let me take you back to where this all started, because honestly, you need the whole picture to understand how I went from being a woman who couldn't even look at herself in the mirror to someone who made the entire country stop and stare. It was a Tuesday morning in March when Dr. Rodriguez sat across from me in that sterile office that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. I remember thinking how strange it was that life-changing news always seemed to come on the most ordinary days. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and there was this motivational poster behind her desk with a kitten hanging from a branch that said, "Hang in there." And I swear, even now, I can't decide if that was cruel irony or perfect timing. "Clara," she said, and I knew immediately from the way she said my name. Gentle, like she was handling glass, that whatever came next was going to shatter my world. The biopsy results came back. It's breast cancer, stage 2. You know how they say time stops in moments like that? It doesn't. Time actually speeds up, like someone hit fast forward on your life and suddenly you're drowning in medical terms and treatment options and statistics that sound like they're talking about someone else's life, someone else's body, someone else's future. I called David the moment I got to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. And when he answered with his usual cheerful, "Hey babe, how'd it go?" I just broke down, right there in the hospital parking lot, surrounded by people dealing with their own tragedies. I sobbed into the phone like a child. "It's cancer," I managed to get out between gasps. "David, it's cancer." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him take this deep, shuddering breath, and he said, Okay, we'll figure this out. I'm coming to get you right now." And he did. David showed up at that hospital parking lot in 15 minutes flat, still wearing his paint-splattered work clothes from the construction site, and he held me while I cried until there were no tears left. He stroked my hair, my beautiful, long auburn hair that I'd been growing for 3 years, and whispered that everything would be okay, that we would fight this together. I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. The next few weeks passed in a blur of appointments and second opinions and insurance calls. David came to every single one, asked all the right questions, took notes in his careful handwriting. When Dr. Rodriguez explained the treatment plan, surgery, followed by 4 months of chemotherapy, he squeezed my hand and nodded like he was accepting a military mission. "Whatever it takes," he said. "We'll do whatever it takes." The surgery was scheduled for April 15th, tax day, which felt like some kind of cosmic joke. They were going to do a lumpectomy, remove the tumour and some surrounding tissue, and then we'd start chemo 3 weeks later. Dr. Rodriguez was optimistic about my prognosis, but she was also brutally honest about what the treatment would do to my body. "The chemotherapy will likely cause hair loss," she explained during one of our pre-surgery consultations. "It's temporary, but it can be emotionally challenging. Some patients find it helpful to cut their hair short before treatment begins, or even to shop for wigs in advance." I looked at David when she said this, and his face went completely pale. I mean, the man looked like he'd seen a ghost. After the appointment, as we walked to the car, he was unusually quiet. "You okay?" I asked, linking my arm through his. "Yeah, of course," he said, but he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Just processing everything, you know." I should have known then. I should have paid attention to that look, to the way he suddenly seemed uncomfortable when he looked at me. But I was so focused on my own fear, so desperate to believe that our love was strong enough to weather this storm, that I ignored every single red flag. The surgery went well, better than expected actually. Dr. Rodriguez was able to remove the entire tumour with clear margins, which meant they got it all. I woke up groggy, but hopeful, with David sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand and smiling that crooked smile I'd fallen in love with 8 years earlier. "How are you feeling beautiful?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "Like I got hit by a truck," I mumbled, still loopy from the anesthesia, but optimistic. "Good," he said and kissed my forehead. "That's my girl." Recovery from the surgery took longer than I expected. The fatigue was overwhelming, and even simple tasks like making coffee or taking a shower left me exhausted. But David was amazing during those first 2 weeks. He took time off work, cooked my favourite meals, brought me books and magazines, and never once complained about having to take care of me. I remember thinking, as I watched him make me soup one afternoon, that this was what marriage was supposed to be. In sickness and in health, right? We were living our vows, and while the circumstances were terrible, there was something beautiful about discovering that your partner really would stand by you when everything fell apart. But then came the day we had to go wig shopping. Dr. Rodriguez had recommended we do this before chemo started, while I still had my hair so I could match the colour and style as closely as possible. David had been putting off this trip for weeks, always finding some excuse. Work was busy, we should wait until I felt stronger. Maybe the hair loss wouldn't be as bad as the doctor thought. Finally, I made the appointment myself at a specialty shop downtown that catered to cancer patients. The woman on the phone, Janet, was so kind and understanding that I actually felt excited about it. Maybe this could be fun, I thought. Maybe I could try a style I'd never been brave enough to attempt before. "Ready for this?" I asked David as we pulled into the parking lot of the wig boutique. He was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "Yeah," he said, but his voice cracked a little. "Sure." Janet met us at the door with a warm smile and immediately put me at ease. She explained the different types of wigs, synthetic versus human hair, cap construction, maintenance requirements. She had me sit in front of a well-lit mirror and examined my hair colour and face shape with the expertise of someone who'd done this thousands of times. "You have gorgeous hair," she said, running her fingers through my auburn waves. "We'll have no trouble finding something that looks natural." She brought out several options, and I tried them on one by one. A sleek bob that made me look sophisticated, a curly style that reminded me of my college days, a shorter pixie cut that was surprisingly flattering. With each wig, I turned to David for his opinion. "What do you think of this one?" I'd ask, striking a little pose. But David couldn't look at me. He sat in his chair, staring at his hands or at the floor or at anything except his wife trying on wigs because she was about to lose her hair to chemotherapy. His discomfort was so obvious that even Janet noticed. "It's a lot to process," she said gently, addressing both of us. "This is often harder on the partners than on the patients themselves." I wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he flinched when Janet mentioned how the wig would look once my natural hair was gone. Maybe it was the fact that he still hadn't looked at me directly since we'd walked into the store. We ended up buying 2 wigs, the bob, and a style close to my natural hair, and David was silent during the entire drive home. That night, he went to bed early, claiming he had a headache, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when everything had started to feel so fragile. Chemo started the following Monday. I'd prepared myself for the nausea, the fatigue, the way the drugs would make me feel like I was fighting a war inside my own body. What I hadn't prepared for was how David would react to watching me go through it. The first infusion took 4 hours. David sat beside me the entire time, reading a book, while the chemicals dripped into my veins through an IV port in my chest. Other patients had visitors who chatted and laughed, who brought card games or watched movies together on tablets. David just sat there, turning pages and checking his watch every few minutes like he was counting down to an execution. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," I finally said during the 3rd hour. "No, I want to be here," he insisted, but he still wouldn't look at me directly. The side effects hit me hard after that first treatment. Not just the nausea, but a bone-deep exhaustion that made even thinking feel difficult. I slept for most of the next 3 days, waking up only to sip water or nibble on crackers. David brought me everything I needed, but there was something different about the way he moved around me now. Careful, distant, like I was made of something he might break if he got too close. 2 weeks after my first chemo session, I woke up to find my pillow covered in hair. I'd been warned this would happen, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it are two completely different things. I ran my fingers through what was left on my head, and huge clumps came away in my hands. In the shower, the drain clogged with auburn strands that had been part of me for 32 years. I stood there, naked and dripping, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror. My scalp was visible in patches, and what hair remained hung in thin, pathetic wisps. I looked like I was melting, disappearing piece by piece. That's when I made the decision to shave it all off. I called David into the bathroom and showed him the electric clippers I'd found in our junk drawer. "Will you help me?" I asked. The look of pure horror that crossed his face will be burned into my memory forever. He actually took a step backward, like I'd asked him to help me commit a crime. "Clara, maybe we should wait," he stammered. "Maybe it won't all fall out." "Look at me," I said, grabbing a handful of loose hair and letting it fall to the floor. "It's already happening. I'd rather do this on my terms than wake up bald one morning." But he couldn't do it. My husband, who claimed he would stand by me through anything, couldn't bring himself to help me shave off my hair. So I did it myself, right there in our bathroom, while he watched from the doorway with tears streaming down his face. When I was finished, I looked at myself in the mirror. Completely bald, with the angry red scar from my surgery visible above my left breast. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, but there was something powerful about taking control of my own transformation. Something defiant. "What do you think?" I asked, turning to face David. He looked at me for maybe half a second before his face crumpled. Then he turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving me standing there alone. That night, David slept on the couch. He said he didn't want to disturb me while I was recovering, but I knew the truth. He couldn't bear to look at what I'd become. And honestly, I didn't see it coming. Even after the wig shopping disaster, even after his reaction to me shaving my head, I still believed that this was just a rough patch. That once I got through treatment and my hair grew back, everything would return to normal. I was so naive. The next few weeks established a pattern that should have broken my heart, but I was too sick and exhausted to fully process what was happening. David would drive me to chemo appointments, but wouldn't come inside anymore. He'd make sure I had food and water and my medications, but he'd barely speak to me. At night, he'd stay up late watching TV in the living room, coming to bed only after he was sure I was asleep. I tried wearing the wigs around the house, thinking maybe that would help him feel more comfortable, but it was like putting on a costume of my former self, and the synthetic hair itched against my sensitive scalp. Plus, David could tell the difference. He'd look at me with this sad, pitying expression that was somehow worse than not being looked at all. My sister, Emma, came to visit during my 6th week of treatment. She took one look at the dynamic between David and me and immediately knew something was wrong. "He's being weird, isn't he?" she said after David had made some excuse to leave the house for the entire afternoon. "He's just struggling with seeing me like this," I defended him. "It's hard for him too." Emma sat down next to me on the couch and took my hands in hers. "Clara, honey, it's supposed to be hard. That's what marriage is. You don't get to check out when things get difficult." "He hasn't checked out," I protested. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. "When's the last time he told you that you looked beautiful?" Emma asked gently. I opened my mouth to answer and realised I couldn't remember. Before the diagnosis? Before the surgery? Definitely before I lost my hair. "When's the last time he touched you? Really touched you, not just handed you something or helped you up?" Again, I couldn't answer. "Clara," Emma said, and her voice was so gentle it made me want to cry. "He's already gone. His body is here, but he's already gone." I wanted to argue with her, to defend my husband and my marriage, but deep down I knew she was right. David had fallen in love with a healthy woman with beautiful hair and a perfect body. The woman I'd become, bald, scarred, sick from chemotherapy, wasn't someone he knew how to love. But I still wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. The breaking point came during my 10th week of treatment. I was halfway through chemo, and while my body was getting stronger and adapting to the drugs, my relationship with David was deteriorating rapidly. He'd started working longer hours, coming home after I was already in bed. On weekends, he'd find projects around the house that kept him busy and away from me. I tried everything I could think of to reconnect with him. I cooked his favourite dinner, even though the smell of food still made me nauseous. I suggested we watch a movie together, just like we used to. I even tried initiating physical intimacy, thinking maybe if we could just break through this barrier, everything would be okay. But David recoiled from my touch like I was contagious. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm just tired." That night, I lay in our bed listening to him move around in the living room, and I finally let myself acknowledge what I'd been refusing to see. My husband was disgusted by me. The woman he'd married no longer existed in his eyes, and he was just going through the motions until... what? Until I was cured? Until my hair grew back? Until he figured out how to leave without looking like a monster? The answer came the next morning. I woke up around 9, later than usual, because I'd barely slept, and I could hear David moving around in our bedroom, which was strange because he'd been sleeping on the couch for weeks. I got up to see what was going on, and I found him standing in front of our open closet, methodically packing clothes into a large suitcase. "What are you doing?" I asked, though part of me already knew. He didn't stop packing, didn't even turn around. "I am going to stay at my brother's place for a while." "For how long?" "I don't know." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I just need some space to think." "Space to think about what, exactly?" Finally, he turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. Not anger or sadness, but something worse. Resignation. Like he'd already made peace with what he was about to do. "Clara, I can't do this anymore." "Can't do what? Be married to me. Support me through cancer. Honour the vows we made 8 years ago." "I never expected..." He gestured vaguely in my direction. "I never expected it would be like this." "Like what?" I demanded, and I could feel rage building in my chest like a fire. "Like me being sick? Like me needing you? Like me not looking like the woman you married?" "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be having a husband who doesn't abandon me in the middle of chemotherapy because I lost my hair." David closed the suitcase with a sharp zip. "I'm not abandoning you. I just need time to figure out how to handle this." "There's nothing to figure out," I said, and my voice was getting louder. "You stand by me. You love me. You help me fight this. That's what you do when someone you love is sick." "I do love you," he said quietly. "No, you don't." The words came out with absolute certainty. "You loved who I used to be. You loved my hair and my healthy body, and the woman who never asked you to take care of her. But you don't love me. Not the real me. Not the me that exists right now." He picked up the suitcase and started walking toward the bedroom door. "I'll call you in a few days." "Don't bother," I said to his back. "If you walk out that door right now, while I'm going through the fight of my life, don't bother calling. Don't bother coming back." David paused in the doorway, and for a moment I thought he might turn around. I thought he might drop that suitcase and tell me he was sorry, that he was scared, that he wanted to try harder. Instead, he said, "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce papers." And then he was gone. I stood there in our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of our life together. Wedding photos, vacation souvenirs, the book he'd been reading still open on his nightstand, and I felt something inside me break. Not my heart exactly, because I think that had been breaking slowly for weeks. Something deeper, something fundamental about who I thought I was, and what I thought my life meant. I was 32 years old, bored from chemotherapy, fighting cancer alone, and my husband had just walked out because I wasn't pretty enough anymore. But you know what? That moment, standing in that empty bedroom, was also the moment I started to find myself again. I spent the rest of that day crying. Not the gentle, ladylike tears I'd been shedding for weeks, but ugly, angry sobs that came from somewhere deep in my soul. I cried for my marriage, for my hair, for the future I'd thought we were building together. I cried because I was scared and sick and now completely alone. Emma came over that evening after I called her, and she held me while I told her what had happened. She didn't say, "I told you so," even though she absolutely could have. Instead, she made me tea and ordered Chinese food and stayed the night, sleeping on the couch that still smelled like David's cologne. "You're going to be okay," she said the next morning over coffee. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're going to be more than okay." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because," she said, smiling at me with fierce love, "you're the strongest person I know. You just haven't figured it out yet." I didn't believe her then, but I wanted to. More than anything, I wanted to believe that there was a version of this story where I came out stronger instead of broken. The next few weeks were the hardest of my entire life. Continuing chemotherapy while going through a divorce is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I had to find a lawyer, figure out how to manage our finances as a single person, and deal with the fact that my husband was telling everyone we knew that he needed space to process my illness. Space to process. Like, my cancer was something that was happening to him. But slowly, something unexpected started happening. Without David around, constantly reminding me of what I'd lost, I began to see myself differently. Not as a sick woman or a cancer patient or someone to be pitied, but as someone who was fighting and surviving and refusing to give up. I started taking better care of myself, not just medically, but emotionally. I bought new clothes that fit my changing body. I experimented with makeup techniques I'd learned from YouTube videos made by other cancer patients. I even started going out without my wig sometimes, just a colourful scarf wrapped around my head, and discovered that the world didn't end when people saw that I was bald. Most importantly, I started therapy. Dr. Patricia Hendricks specialised in helping people navigate major life transitions, and she became my lifeline during those dark months. She helped me understand that David's inability to love me through my illness wasn't a reflection of my worth as a person. It was a reflection of his limitations, his fears, his shallow understanding of what love actually means. "You're grieving multiple losses at once," she explained during one of our sessions. "Your health, your appearance, your marriage, your future as you imagined it. That's an enormous amount of change to process. Sometimes I feel like I'm not even the same person anymore," I admitted. "You're not," she said gently, "and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we have to lose who we were to discover who we're capable of becoming." During my 14th week of treatment, something amazing happened. I was at the infusion centre getting my regular blood work done before chemo when the nurse practitioner mentioned that my counts looked better than they had in months. "Your body is responding really well to treatment," she said, smiling as she reviewed my chart. "Dr. Rodriguez is going to be pleased." That afternoon, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed what I'd been afraid to hope for. The latest scans showed no evidence of cancer. None. My body had not only tolerated the chemotherapy, but had responded better than anyone had expected. "We'll finish out your treatment schedule to be safe," she said, "but, Clara, you're officially in remission." I called Emma from the parking lot, sobbing with relief and joy. I called my parents, who cried with me over the phone. I even thought about calling David, sharing this incredible news with the person who was supposed to be my partner in all of life's biggest moments. But then I realised I didn't want to. This victory was mine. I'd earned it by showing up to every appointment, by enduring every side effect, by fighting for my life while my husband packed his bags. David didn't deserve to share in this moment. Instead, I drove myself home, ordered my favourite pizza, and celebrated alone. And you know what? It felt perfect. My last chemotherapy session was scheduled for a Thursday in early August. Emma came with me, and we brought cupcakes for the nursing staff who had become like family over the past 4 months. As the final drugs dripped into my system, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not just hope that I would survive, but a hope that I could build something beautiful from the ashes of everything I'd lost. The divorce was finalised 3 weeks later. David got the house. I didn't want it anymore anyway. Too many memories of the man who couldn't love me when I needed it most. I moved into a small apartment downtown, close to Emma and to the support group I joined for cancer survivors. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. My hair started growing back almost immediately after my last treatment. At first, it came in soft and fuzzy, like baby hair, and completely different from what I'd had before. Instead of auburn waves, it was growing in darker and with a slight curl. Dr. Rodriguez said this was common. Chemo sometimes changed hair texture permanently. I decided I liked it. By October, I had about an inch of new growth, and I felt confident enough to go out without a wig or scarf. Just me, my slowly returning hair, and a sense of self I'd never had before. I was different now, but different in ways that made me stronger, more authentic, more unapologetically myself. That's when I met Rebecca. I was at a coffee shop near my apartment, reading and enjoying the October sunshine, when this woman approached my table. She was probably in her 40s, professionally dressed with the kind of confidence that immediately commanded attention. "Excuse me," she said, "but I couldn't help noticing. Are you a cancer survivor?" I touched my short hair self-consciously. Even though it was growing back, it was obvious that I'd recently been through treatment. "Yes," I said. "How did you know?" "I'm Rebecca Martinez, and I work for Inspire magazine. We're putting together a special issue about beauty and resilience, and I think you might be exactly what we're looking for." Inspire magazine. I knew it well. It was one of those publications that focused on real women's stories, featuring people who had overcome challenges or achieved something extraordinary. I'd read it in doctors' waiting rooms during my treatment. "I'm not sure I understand," I said. Rebecca sat down across from me, her eyes bright with excitement. "We want to feature women who embody strength and beauty in unconventional ways, women who face something difficult and come through it more powerful than before. Would you be interested in being interviewed for a potential feature story?" I almost said no. The idea of sharing my story publicly, of putting my face and my experience out there for the world to see, terrified me. But something about Rebecca's enthusiasm, and maybe something about how far I'd already come, made me pause. "What would it involve?" I asked. "An interview about your experience, and, if we move forward, a professional photo shoot. Nothing exploitative or sensational. We want to show real beauty, real strength. Women like you who've discovered something about themselves through adversity." I thought about David, about how he'd seen my baldness as something shameful, something to hide from. I thought about all the hours I'd spent in that wig, trying to look like someone I used to be. And then I thought about the woman I'd become, scarred, changed, but somehow more authentically myself than I had ever been. "Okay," I said, "let's do it." The interview process took place over several weeks. Rebecca was an incredibly skilled journalist, and she had a way of asking questions that helped me tell my story without feeling like I was being exploited or pitied. We talked about my diagnosis, my treatment, my divorce, and, most importantly, about what I'd learned about myself through the process. "What would you want other women in your situation to know?" she asked during our final interview session. I thought about that question for a long time. I guess I'd want them to know that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that sets you free. My cancer didn't just take away my hair and my marriage. It took away all the illusions I had about what mattered and who I really was. And that was actually a gift. How so? Because I discovered that I'm much stronger than I ever knew. I discovered that I don't need someone else's approval to be beautiful or valuable. I discovered that the opinion that matters most is my own. A month later, Rebecca called to tell me that not only were they running my story, but they wanted me to be on the cover of a national magazine. "Are you serious?" I asked, sitting down hard on my couch. "Completely serious. Clara, your story is powerful and your photos are stunning. The whole team agrees. You're exactly the kind of woman we want representing this issue." I agreed, though I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of nervous excitement that bordered on panic. A cover shoot was a much bigger deal than the initial photos we'd taken. Professional makeup artist, wardrobe stylist, elaborate lighting setups, the works. The day of the shoot, I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. My hair was now about 3 inches long, still obviously short, but healthy and shiny and completely my own. I'd been working out regularly since finishing treatment, and I felt stronger and more confident in my body than I had in years. The photographer James was a gentleman in his 50s, who specialised in portraits of real people rather than traditional fashion photography. He and his team spent an hour getting the lighting just right, and then it was time to begin. "I want you to think about everything you've overcome," James said as he started shooting. "Think about how far you've travelled, literally and figuratively, to get to this moment." And suddenly, it was easy. I thought about that day in Dr. Rodriguez's office, when I'd felt like my life was ending. I thought about David walking out with his suitcase while I was fighting for my life. I thought about every chemo session, every moment of despair, every time I'd looked in the mirror and barely recognised myself. But I also thought about the strength I'd discovered, the relationships I'd deepened, the authentic self I'd finally found. I thought about Emma's unwavering support, about Dr. Hendricks helping me rebuild my self-worth, about all the other cancer survivors I'd met who had become part of my chosen family. "Beautiful," James kept saying as he worked. "Absolutely beautiful." When we finished, I felt like I'd been through some kind of transformative experience. Not just the photo shoot, but everything it represented. Here I was, a woman who 8 months ago had been abandoned by her husband for losing her hair, about to appear on the cover of a national magazine. The magazine came out on a Tuesday in December. Rebecca had sent me advance copies and I'd shared them with Emma and my parents and my support group friends. But seeing it on actual newsstands in grocery stores and bookshops was surreal. There I was, smiling confidently at the camera, my short hair styled in a way that looked effortlessly chic. The headline read, "Beauty Redefined, Clara's Journey from Cancer to Confidence." Inside was a 6-page spread with more photos and the full interview, telling my story in my own words. I bought 5 copies from the grocery store near my apartment, and the teenage cashier looked at the magazine, then at me, then back at the magazine. "Holy crap," she said, then immediately blushed. "Sorry, I mean, that's you, isn't it? On the cover?" "It is," I said, smiling. "That's so cool. You look amazing." I walked home feeling like I was floating. In the space of 8 months, I'd gone from a woman who couldn't bear to look at herself in the mirror to someone whose image was on magazine covers across the country. But more than that, I'd gone from someone who defined herself through other people's eyes to someone who knew her own worth. That evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognise the number, but something made me answer. "Clara?" The voice was tentative, uncertain. "David." I hadn't heard from him since the divorce was finalised. "I saw the magazine," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. You look incredible. Thank you. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About us. About how things ended." I waited, not sure what he expected me to say. "I made a mistake," he continued. "A huge mistake. I was scared and I handled everything wrong, and I know that now. Clara, I want to try again. I want to come home." I looked at myself in the hallway mirror as he spoke. Short-haired, strong, confident. A woman who had survived cancer and divorce, and emerged more beautiful than she'd ever been, not despite her scars, but because of them. "No," I said quietly. "What?" I said, "No, David. You don't get to come back now." "But I love you. I've always loved you." "No, you loved the version of me that was convenient, the version that didn't require anything difficult from you. You couldn't love me when I was sick and scared and needed you most. You don't get to love me now that I'm successful and confident and healing. Clara, please, I know I hurt you, but people make mistakes. People can change." "You're right," I said. People can change. I changed. I learned that I don't need someone who only loves me when I'm easy to love. I need someone who loves me, especially when I'm not. "I can be that person," he said desperately. "Maybe you can, for someone else, but not for me. Not anymore." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. Then I called Emma. "He saw the magazine," I told her. "Of course he did. The whole world saw the magazine. What did he want?" "To come back, to try again." "And what did you tell him?" I told him no. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "How does it feel?" I thought about that question as I looked around my small apartment. filled with things I'd chosen, decorated in colours I loved, organised exactly how I wanted it. I thought about the life I was building, the friendships I was nurturing, the woman I was becoming. It feels like freedom, I said. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a conference for cancer survivors. The organiser had read my story in Inspire magazine and thought I'd be perfect for their keynote address. Me, giving a keynote, the woman who'd once been too ashamed to leave the house without a wig, standing on that stage looking out at hundreds of people who had fought their own battles with cancer, I shared the most important thing I'd learned through my experience. Your worst day, I told them, is not your defining day. What defines you is what you do after your worst day, how you rebuild, how you choose to see yourself, how you decide to move forward. I talked about David, about how his abandonment had initially felt like confirmation that I was no longer worthy of love. And then I talked about how I'd learned that someone else's inability to love you has nothing to do with your value as a person. The love that matters most, I said, is the love you give yourself. Everything else is extra. After my speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25, and she was wearing a beautiful silk scarf wrapped around her head in a style I recognized immediately. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "My husband left me 2 weeks ago, right after I started losing my hair. I've been feeling like maybe he was right to leave, like maybe I'm not worth loving anymore." I took her hands in mine and looked directly into her eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. His leaving has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with his character. You are not less valuable because you're sick. You are not less beautiful because you lost your hair. You are fighting for your life, and that makes you a warrior." She broke down crying then, and I held her while she sobbed in the middle of that conference centre lobby. Other survivors gathered around us, creating a circle of support around this young woman who was learning the same painful lesson I'd learned months earlier. That moment reminded me why sharing my story mattered, not for the fame or recognition, but for women like her, women who needed to see that survival was possible, that joy was possible, that love, real love, was possible even after the worst betrayal imaginable. Over the next year, my life took directions I never could have predicted. The magazine feature led to other opportunities, speaking engagements, consulting work with cancer organisations, even a small book deal to write about my experience. I wasn't becoming famous exactly, but I was building a platform that mattered. More importantly, I was building a life that felt authentically mine. I started dating again, tentatively at first. Dr. Hendricks had helped me understand that not all men would react like David had, that there were people in the world capable of loving someone through difficulty as well as joy. But I was careful, protective of the self-worth I'd worked so hard to rebuild. The first few dates were disasters. Men who seemed put off when I mentioned my cancer history, or who acted like my survival made me some kind of inspirational figure rather than just a person. I started to wonder if maybe I was destined to be alone, if my experience had somehow marked me as too complicated for normal relationships. Then I met Michael. He was a photographer, not fashion, but documentary work, and we met at a gallery opening featuring his series on urban farming initiatives. I was there with Emma, who dragged me out because she thought I was spending too much time alone working on my book. Michael and I started talking about his photographs, and I was struck by how he captured not just images, but stories. Real human stories about resilience and community and finding beauty in unexpected places. "Your work reminds me of something," I said, studying a particularly moving portrait of an elderly man tending to a rooftop garden. "There's this magazine story I read once about redefining beauty, about how the most interesting faces are the ones that have lived through something." He smiled. "Inspire magazine, December issue. That was you, wasn't it?" I was so surprised that he recognized me that I actually took a step backward. "How did you know?" "I keep that issue in my studio," he said. "Your photographer did incredible work, but more than that, there was something in your expression that I found captivating. You looked like someone who had seen the worst life had to offer and decided to smile anyway. We talked for 3 hours that night about photography and storytelling and what it meant to find beauty in imperfection. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first real date was coffee on a Sunday afternoon. I decided to be completely honest from the beginning. No hiding my history, no pretending to be someone I wasn't. If Michael couldn't handle the truth about my life, better to find out early. I should probably mention, I said after we'd ordered, that I'm a cancer survivor. The diagnosis, treatment, everything happened about 2 years ago. It changed me in pretty fundamental ways. Michael nodded thoughtfully. How so? Well, for one thing, it ended my marriage. My husband couldn't handle seeing me go through treatment. He left during chemo. I watched Michael's face carefully as I said this, looking for signs of discomfort or pity or judgment. Instead, I saw something that looked like anger. He left you while you were sick. He said he needed space to process my illness. What an absolute coward, Michael said, and the vehemence in his voice surprised me. I'm sorry. I know he was your husband and you probably loved him, but that's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. You'd be surprised how many people think he was justified, that it was just too hard for him, too traumatic to watch. Being a partner means showing up especially when things are hard. Anyone can love someone when it's easy. That's when I knew Michael was different. We took things slowly. After David, I was terrified of trusting someone with my heart again, and Michael seemed to understand that without me having to explain it. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never made me feel like I was damaged goods or an inspiration or anything other than a woman he enjoyed spending time with. On our 4th date, about 2 months after we'd met, I finally told him the whole story. Everything about David's reaction to my diagnosis, the wig shopping disaster, how he'd moved out while I was still in treatment. I told him about the magazine cover and David's phone call afterward, begging to come back. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Michael said when I finished. Your ex-husband abandoned you during chemotherapy because you lost your hair and then wanted to reconcile after you became successful? That's about the size of it. And you told him no. I told him no. Michael was quiet for a long moment, and I started to worry that maybe the whole story was too much, too complicated for someone I'd only been dating for 2 months. Then he said, "Good for you." That took incredible strength. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, I admitted. He said people could change, that everyone deserves a second chance. Clara, Michael said gently, there's a difference between making a mistake and revealing your character. When someone you love is fighting for their life, you don't get to take a break from being their partner. That's not a mistake. That's who he is. 6 months later, Michael and I moved in together, not because we were rushing things, but because we'd both discovered that we were better versions of ourselves when we were together. He photographed me often, not posed shots, but candid moments of me cooking breakfast or reading in the garden or laughing at something on television. "You have the most expressive face," he'd say, showing me the pictures later, especially when you're not performing for anyone. The photos he took of me were nothing like the professional shots for the magazine cover. They were intimate, real, unguarded. In them, I could see the woman I'd become, scarred but smiling, changed but confident, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with conventional standards. It was Michael who encouraged me to write a second book, this one specifically about rebuilding relationships after trauma. "You have something important to say about what love actually looks like," he told me. Not the fairy tale version, but the real thing. The book proposal led to meetings with publishers, which led to a 2-book deal and speaking opportunities at relationship conferences and therapy conventions. I was becoming known not just as a cancer survivor, but as someone who understood something fundamental about resilience and authentic connection. One evening, about a year and a half after we'd started dating, Michael and I were having dinner at our favourite restaurant when he suddenly got very quiet. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong," he said, but he looked nervous. "I've just been thinking about something and I want to ask you a question." My heart started racing. Were we moving too fast? Had he changed his mind about us? Was he having second thoughts about being with someone with my history? "Clara," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know you've been hurt before. I know someone made you feel like you weren't worth staying for when things got difficult. But I need you to know something." I held my breath. "I want to stay, not just for the good times, but for everything. If you get sick again, I want to be the one holding your hand in doctors' offices. If you have bad days, I want to be the one bringing you soup and terrible movies. If your hair falls out again, I want to be the one helping you pick out scarves or celebrating how beautiful you look without it." Tears were streaming down my face now. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he continued, squeezing my hand. "Not yet. I'm just asking you to believe that you're worth staying for. Always, no matter what." That night, as we lay in bed together, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been a woman who defined herself through her husband's eyes, who believed her value was tied to her appearance and her ability to be convenient and undemanding. Cancer had stripped all of that away, not just my hair, but my illusions about love and marriage and what mattered in life. David's abandonment had broken my heart, but it had also freed me from a relationship that was built on the shallowest possible foundation. Now I was with someone who saw my scars and my strength as equally beautiful, who loved me not despite what I'd been through, but because of who I'd become because of it. But the story doesn't end with finding love again, because that would suggest that a woman's worth is still tied to having a partner, and I'd learned better than that. The real ending came about 6 months later, when I was invited to speak at a medical conference for oncologists and nurses. They wanted me to talk about the patient experience, about what healthcare providers could do to better support people going through cancer treatment. Standing in front of that room full of doctors and nurses, I realised I had something important to say that went beyond my personal story. When someone is diagnosed with cancer, I told them, they're not just fighting a disease. They're fighting for their sense of self, their relationships, their future, their very identity. Some of the people in their lives will rise to the occasion and become heroes. Others will disappoint them in ways that cut deeper than any surgical incision. I talked about David, about how his inability to see me as beautiful and worthy during treatment had been almost as devastating as the cancer itself. But I also talked about Emma, about Dr. Hendricks, about Michael, about all the people who had shown me what real love and support looked like. Your patients need to know that their worth isn't tied to their appearance or their ability to make others comfortable with their illness, I said. They need to know that the right people will love them through anything, and the wrong people will reveal themselves. Both of those things are gifts, even when they don't feel like it at the time. After my talk, a young doctor approached me. "Thank you for that," she said. "I've been treating cancer patients for 5 years, but I never thought about the emotional impact of partners who can't handle the treatment process. It's more common than you'd think," I told her, "and the patients often blame themselves. They think they're being abandoned because they're no longer lovable, not because their partner has failed them." That conversation sparked something in me. I started developing workshops for cancer centres, programs designed to help patients and their families navigate the emotional challenges of treatment. Not just dealing with the disease, but dealing with how relationships change, how some people step up and others step away. The workshops grew into a consulting business, which grew into a non-profit organisation focused on providing emotional support and education for cancer patients and their loved ones. I hired other survivors to lead support groups, developed resources for family members struggling to cope, and created safe spaces for people to talk about the aspects of cancer that no one wants to discuss. The organisation, which I named Second Chapter, became my life's work, not because I wanted to be defined by my cancer experience forever, but because I'd learned something valuable through my pain, and I wanted to share it. 2 years after that medical conference, I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about the need for improved psychosocial support in cancer care. Me, Clara, the woman who'd once been too ashamed to leave her house without a wig, speaking to members of Congress about healthcare policy. Sitting in that hearing room, waiting for my turn to speak, I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been. The naive newlywed who thought love conquered everything. The terrified patient who let her husband's reaction define her self-worth. The bitter divorcee who wondered if she'd ever be whole again. The magazine cover model who'd reclaimed her beauty on her own terms. All of those women had led me to this moment, to this chance to make a difference for other people going through the same struggles I'd faced. When I finished my testimony, one of the congresswomen thanked me for my courage in sharing such a personal story. But courage wasn't the right word, I realised. What I'd developed wasn't courage, it was clarity. Clarity about what mattered, about who I was, about what I wanted my life to mean. That evening, I called Emma from my hotel room in Washington, D.C. "How did it go?" she asked. "I think we might actually get some funding for psychosocial support programs," I told her. "But, Em, that's not why I'm calling." "Oh, I keep thinking about what you told me that day, right after David left. Do you remember? You said I was the strongest person you knew, but I just hadn't figured it out yet." "I remember. You were right. But it's more than that. I wasn't just strong. I was exactly who I was supposed to be. I just had to lose everything else to find her." Michael and I got married the following spring, not because we needed marriage to validate our relationship, but because we wanted to celebrate what we'd built together and commit to continuing to build it. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, and I wore a dress that showed my surgical scar, not because I was trying to make a statement, but because I'd stopped trying to hide the evidence of everything I'd survived. During our vows, Michael said something that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. "Clara, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections and struggles and scars tell a story you want to be part of." As we danced at our reception, my short hair styled simply, my scar visible above the neckline of my dress, I caught sight of myself in one of the mirrors decorating the venue. For just a moment, I saw myself the way David might see me now. Different, changed, marked by everything I'd been through. But instead of shame, I felt pride. This woman in the mirror had survived cancer, divorce, abandonment, and rebuilding. She'd turned her pain into purpose, and her scars into strength. She'd learned to love herself fiercely, and to accept only the kind of love that matched that intensity. She was beautiful, not despite what she'd been through, but because of it. 6 months after our wedding, I got a letter forwarded through my publisher. The return address showed it was from David, though I hadn't heard from him since that phone call 3 years earlier. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. "Clara," it began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I just wanted you to know that I've been following your career, your organisation, your new life. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm ashamed of the role I played in your story. I've been in therapy for the past 2 years, trying to understand why I reacted the way I did when you got sick. I want you to know that it was never about you not being beautiful enough or worthy enough. It was about my own fear, my own weakness, my own inability to handle the possibility of losing you. I know that doesn't excuse what I did. I know that explanations don't undo the harm I caused, but I wanted you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life, not because of what you've achieved since then, but because I threw away the chance to love someone extraordinary through the most important battle of her life. I hope you're happy. From everything I've seen, you deserve all the joy in the world." I read the letter twice, then showed it to Michael. "How does it make you feel?" he asked. I thought about that question for a long time. 3 years earlier, a letter like this might have reopened old wounds, might have made me question my decision to reject his attempt at reconciliation. Now, it just felt like closure. "Sad for him," I said finally, "and grateful." Grateful that he showed me who he was before we had children together, before I wasted more years with someone who could only love the easy parts of me. I wrote back, a brief note thanking him for his honesty and wishing him well. I didn't share details about my new life or my marriage or my work. I simply said that I'd found peace with our story and hoped he could do the same. Then I filed the letter away and never thought about it again. Because here's what I learned through everything that happened to me. The people who leave you during your darkest moments are doing you a favour. They're clearing space in your life for the people who will stay, who will love you especially when you're not at your best, who will see your struggles as part of your story rather than as reasons to walk away. David couldn't love a woman with cancer, with scars, with hair that fell out and grew back different. But Michael fell in love with exactly that woman, not despite her history, but because of the strength and authenticity that history had revealed. The magazine cover that started all of this hangs in my office now, next to photos from my wedding and pictures of the people we've helped through second chapter. Sometimes, when I'm having a difficult day or dealing with a particularly challenging case, I look at that image of myself, bald, scarred, smiling, with hard-won confidence, and I remember how far I've travelled, not just from sickness to health, though that was important, not just from married to divorced to married again, though that was part of the journey, but from someone who needed other people's approval, to feel valuable to someone who knows her own worth, independent of anyone else's opinion. That transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in grief and anger and uncertainty. There were moments when I wondered if David was right to leave, if maybe I really had become someone unlovable. But every time I felt myself slipping back into that mindset, I forced myself to look in the mirror and see what was actually there. Not a woman diminished by illness, but a woman refined by struggle. Not someone to be pitied, but someone to be admired. Not a victim of circumstances, but a survivor who'd chosen to thrive. The truth is, my cancer didn't just save my life by being caught early and responding to treatment. It saved my life by showing me who I really was, underneath all the pretending and people-pleasing and desperate need for approval I hadn't even realised I'd been carrying around. And David's abandonment, as cruel and devastating as it was at the time, freed me from a marriage that was built on the shakiest possible foundation. If he could only love me when I was healthy and beautiful according to conventional standards, then he never really loved me at all. He loved an image, an idea, a version of me that was designed to make him feel good about himself. Real love, I learned, is what Michael offered from the very beginning. Love that sees your scars and finds them beautiful because they tell the story of how strong you are. Love that shows up, especially when things are difficult. Love that grows deeper through shared struggles rather than running away from them. Last month, I spoke at a conference for newly diagnosed cancer patients. A young woman approached me afterward, tears streaming down her face. "My boyfriend broke up with me yesterday," she said. "He said he couldn't handle watching me go through chemo, that it was too hard for him. I feel like I'm not worth loving anymore." I looked at this beautiful young woman, probably no more than 25, and I saw myself 3 years earlier, broken, abandoned, convinced that her diagnosis had somehow made her unworthy of love. "Listen to me very carefully," I told her, taking her hands in mine. "His leaving has nothing to do with your value and everything to do with his character. You are not less lovable because you're sick. You are not less worthy because you need support. You are fighting for your life, and that makes you a warrior." "But what if no one else will ever want me?" she asked, voicing the fear I'd carried for months after David left. "Then they're not your people," I said simply. "The right person will love you especially because of what you've survived, not despite it. They'll see your strength and your courage and your authenticity, and they'll think they're the luckiest person in the world to get to love someone so real." I gave her my card and invited her to one of our support groups. 6 months later, she sent me a photo from her last chemotherapy session. Bald, smiling, surrounded by friends who'd shown up to celebrate with her. The boyfriend who'd abandoned her was nowhere to be seen, but she looked radiant, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can survive anything. That's what I want people to understand about my story. It's not really about cancer, though cancer was the catalyst. It's not really about divorce, though divorce was part of the journey. It's about discovering that the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that sets you free to become who you were always meant to be. I'm not grateful for my cancer. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. but I'm grateful for who I became because of it. I'm grateful for the clarity it gave me about what matters and who matters. I'm grateful for the way it stripped away everything superficial and showed me what real strength looks like. And I'm especially grateful that it happened before I had children with David, before I wasted more years trying to be someone I wasn't in order to keep someone who was never really mine to begin with. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret telling David no when he called wanting to reconcile. They seem to think I should have given him another chance, that people deserve forgiveness, that marriages are worth fighting for. But here's what they don't understand. I did fight for my marriage. I fought for it every day I was going through treatment. Every time I put on that wig to try to look like someone he could still love. Every night I slept alone while he chose the couch over lying next to his sick wife. David didn't fight for our marriage. He abandoned it the moment it required something difficult from him. When he called wanting to come back, it wasn't because he'd learned to love me through adversity. It was because I'd become successful and confident, and the kind of woman who looked good on his arm again. He wanted to come back for the same shallow reasons he'd left, because of how I looked, how I made him feel about himself, what being with me would say about him. That's not love. That's not marriage. That's not partnership. Real partnership is what I have with Michael now. It's built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine admiration for each other's character, and the understanding that love means showing up especially when things are hard. We've been tested in small ways since we've been together. Job stress, family problems, the normal challenges that life throws at everyone. And every time we've grown closer rather than pulling apart. We've proven to each other over and over that we're both the type of people who lean in during difficulty rather than looking for the exit. That's the difference between a relationship built on convenience and one built on commitment. That's the difference between loving someone's image and loving their soul. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over when David walked out with that suitcase. I thought cancer had stolen not just my hair and my health, but my chance at love and happiness and a meaningful future. I was wrong about all of it. Cancer didn't steal my future, it revealed it. David's abandonment didn't destroy my chance at love. It cleared the way for real love to find me. My scars didn't make me less beautiful. They made me more authentically myself than I'd ever been. The woman on that magazine cover, smiling confidently with her short hair and her visible strength, isn't someone I became despite what happened to me. She's someone I became because of it. And that woman, the one I am now, would never trade places with the woman I was before. Not even for a full head of hair and a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but was hollow at its core. Because this life, the one I built from the ashes of everything I lost, is real. The love I have now is real. The strength I've discovered is real. The woman I've become is real. And that, more than any magazine cover or speaking engagement or professional success, is the victory I'm most proud of. So, when people ask me how I survived cancer and divorce and rebuilding my entire life from scratch, I tell them the truth. I survived by learning to love myself the way I deserve to be loved all along. Everything else just followed from there. And to anyone out there who's going through their own version of what I went through, who feels abandoned or unworthy or convinced that their struggles have made them unlovable, I want you to know this. The people who leave you during your darkest moments are not your people. They're making space for the ones who will stay, who will love you especially when you're not at your best, who will see your scars as proof of your strength rather than evidence of your brokenness. Your real life, your authentic life, your beautiful life is waiting on the other side of everything that's trying to break you right now. Trust me on this one, I would know